Hey guys, tonight we begin with the story of one of the greatest minds in human history, Archimedes, a man whose genius bridged the worlds of pure mathematics and practical invention, whose machines could lift ships, defend cities, and whose insights laid the groundwork for modern science. So settle in, get comfortable, and allow the story to unfold at its own pace. This is not just history, but a journey through the life of a man who showed the world that knowledge itself is power. And leave a comment letting us know where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always amusing to find out who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the light and maybe turn on the fan for a soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the year 287 BC, in the Greek city of Syracuse on the island of Sicily, a boy was born who would one day reshape the way humanity thought about numbers, machines, and the natural world. His name was Archimedes, and although he lived more than 2,000 years ago, his discoveries remain so deeply woven into our lives that many of his principles are still taught to schoolchildren today. Syracuse, his birthplace, was not a quiet town, but a thriving hub of trade and culture. Situated along the Mediterranean, it stood at the crossroads of Greek, Carthaginian, and Roman worlds. Ships laden with grain, olive oil, and fine goods docked in its harbors, while philosophers, merchants, and soldiers filled its busy streets. At once prosperous and vulnerable, Syracuse was constantly pulled between larger powers, forced to rely on its ingenuity to survive. Into this world came Archimedes. His father, Phidias, was said to be an astronomer, a man who gazed at the heavens and measured their motions. It was from him, perhaps, that Archimedes inherited a fascination with numbers and patterns. Some ancient writers also suggest that Archimedes was related to King Hiero II, ruler of Syracuse. Whether by blood or by favor, Archimedes grew up close to the royal court, which would later provide him opportunities and challenges that few others could have imagined. As a child, Archimedes showed a curiosity that set him apart. Where other boys played with stones or wooden toys, Archimedes was said to spend hours arranging objects, testing their balance, and asking why things behaved as they did. He would trace figures in the sand, practice geometry with pebbles, and watch the rise and fall of the sun, as if the heavens themselves were a puzzle waiting to be solved. But Syracuse, vibrant though it was, could not contain the hunger of his mind. In his youth, Archimedes traveled to Alexandria in Egypt, the intellectual heart of the Hellenistic world. There, in the great library of Alexandria, he likely encountered works of Euclid and other brilliant mathematicians. Alexandria was a place where geometry, astronomy, and philosophy flourished, and where Archimedes could test his ideas against the sharpest minds of his day. By the time he returned to Syracuse, Archimedes had become more than a student. He was a thinker, a mathematician, and an engineer in the making. the city to which he returned would soon become both his laboratory and his fortress. Its harbors, docks, and walls would provide the setting for experiments that astonished kings and baffled enemies. Archimedes' story, however, begins not with war machines or sudden discoveries, but with a restless child in a bustling city, staring at the world and refusing to accept it at face value. For him, every object, every sound, every pattern was a question, and every question had an answer, waiting to be uncovered. To understand Archimedes' early years, we must picture the city that shaped him. Syracuse, at the time of his birth, was among the most important cities in the Greek world. Founded centuries earlier by colonists from Corinth, it had grown into a glittering jewel of Sicily. Its harbor bustled with merchant vessels. Its marketplaces overflowed with goods from across the Mediterranean, and its skyline was marked by temples dedicated to Zeus, Apollo, and Artemis. Life in Syracuse was vibrant but precarious. The island of Sicily had long been a contested prize. To the west lay the Carthaginians, masters of naval power. To the north, across the narrow sea, rose Rome, still an ambitious republic, but already casting its gaze across the Mediterranean. Syracuse found itself caught between these powers, a city both admired for its wealth and threatened for its strategic position. The people of Syracuse were, therefore, accustomed to both luxury and danger. Into this atmosphere Archimedes was born, likely within a family of some standing. His father, Phidias the astronomer, would have introduced him to the heavens, charting the rising of stars, the path of the sun, the movements of the moon. To a boy with a restless mind, these lessons must have been intoxicating. Ancient astronomy was more than stargazing. It was mathematics written across the sky, a cosmic puzzle where order lay hidden beneath apparent chaos. Stories about Archimedes' childhood are sparse, but legends hint at a boy who was restless, curious, and absorbed by problems. He is said to have drawn diagrams in the sand or scratched them onto dusty walls. He may have watched workers at the docks, fascinated by the lifting of heavy cargo, already asking how ropes and pulleys could be arranged to ease their burden. Syracuse offered many such lessons if one was willing to see them. Ships creaking against their moorings, merchants measuring grain, artisans melting bronze, and builders raising walls stone by stone. What set Archimedes apart was not that he noticed these things, most boys did, but that he sought the rules behind them. Where others saw effort, he saw ratios. Where others felt weight, he imagined balance. A heavy cart was not just an object to be moved, but a problem to be solved. Syracuse itself encouraged such thinking. As a city at the frontier of war and commerce, it prized ingenuity. The same harbor that brought goods also brought fleets of enemies, and the same king who presided over games and banquets also plotted defenses. To grow up in Syracuse was to know that survival depended not only on strength, but also on cleverness. Archimedes' earliest lessons, then, were not confined to scrolls or schools. They were embedded in the daily life of a city alive with commerce, threatened by rivals, and adorned with the marvels of Greek architecture. It was here, amid the din of the marketplace and the echo of temple chants, that Archimedes began to form the questions that would one day yield answers so profound that they are still spoken of millennia later. At some point in his youth, Archimedes left the bustling harbors of Syracuse and made a journey eastward across the Mediterranean. His destination was Alexandria in Egypt, the intellectual crown of the Hellenistic world. Founded by Alexander the Great and ruled by his successors, the Ptolemies, Alexandria had become a gathering place for the greatest minds of the age. Its vast library, said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, preserved the wisdom of Greece, Egypt, and beyond. For a young mathematician, it was nothing less than paradise. It was here that Archimedes may have studied under disciples of Euclid, whose Elements had become the foundational text of geometry. The Elements reduced the complexities of shape and space into axioms and proofs, a methodical framework where truth unfolded step by step. Archimedes, with his insatiable curiosity, must have absorbed this discipline eagerly. From Euclid's pages, he would learn that geometry was not only about diagrams in the sand, but about logical certainty, a way of capturing eternal truths in the human mind. Alexandria was more than a library. It was a living conversation. Astronomers charted the heavens, physicians dissected the human body, and engineers tinkered with water clocks and automata. The air itself seemed to hum with inquiry. Archimedes, still a young man, found himself in the company of scholars who debated, tested, and refined ideas. His mind, already fertile, was sharpened by contact with this community. It was here, perhaps, that he first considered how mathematics could move beyond the abstract. The geometry of circles and triangles was beautiful, but what if it could be applied to levers and pulleys? What if the ratios that governed shapes could also govern machines? The Greeks had long pursued philosophy for its own sake, but Archimedes' genius lay in bridging theory and practice, turning numbers into tools and diagrams into devices. Life in Alexandria also exposed him to Egypt's practical challenges: irrigation of the Nile, measurement of land for taxation, and the mechanics of loading and unloading ships all demanded solutions. Archimedes saw firsthand how mathematics could serve daily life. Where others saw tedious labor, he saw patterns waiting to be harnessed. The years in Alexandria left their mark. Archimedes returned to Syracuse with a mind enriched by the wisdom of the Greeks and sharpened by the energy of the library. He carried with him the rigor of Euclidean geometry, the curiosity of the Alexandrian scholars, and the conviction that mathematics was not confined to scrolls. It could be built into wood and bronze, turned into machines that lifted, measured, and defended. When he set foot again on the streets of Syracuse, he was no longer simply Phidias's son, no longer just a curious boy. He was a thinker trained in the greatest intellectual center of his world, ready to test whether the truths of geometry could change not only his city, but the course of human knowledge. When Archimedes returned from his studies in Alexandria, he came home not to a quiet provincial town, but to a city at the center of Mediterranean politics. Syracuse had long been one of the great powers of Sicily, and under the rule of Hiero II, it was enjoying a period of stability and cautious prosperity. Hiero was a shrewd monarch. Though once a soldier, he proved far more skilled at diplomacy than battle. With Carthage to the west and Rome rising in the north, Hiero steered Syracuse between the two giants, aligning with whichever power best preserved his city's independence. Under his rule, temples rose, trade flourished, and festivals filled the streets. Archimedes, still a young man, would have walked among colonnaded markets and bustling harbors, a city alive with both wealth and anxiety. For Syracuse was a city of contrasts. Its palaces glittered with marble and gold, while its fishermen mended nets on the shore. Its philosophers debated eternal truths, while soldiers drilled on the walls. Its priests offered sacrifices in grand temples, while merchants haggled over shipments of grain and olive oil. The city was both Greek and Sicilian, blending local traditions with Hellenistic culture imported from the mainland. It was also a city that valued ingenuity. Syracuse depended on cleverness as much as strength, for survival demanded both. With Rome and Carthage locked in the Punic Wars, Sicily had become a battleground. Syracuse's independence rested on fragile alliances, and its defenses required constant attention. Machines of war and fortifications were as important as grain stores and festivals. Archimedes, freshly returned from Alexandria, fit neatly into this world. He had studied abstract geometry and pure mathematics, but Syracuse offered him opportunities to apply his knowledge in practical ways. In the bustling shipyards, he might have watched carpenters fit beams together while sailors loaded cargo. In the fields outside the walls, farmers irrigated crops and hauled water. To Archimedes, these were not simply scenes of daily life. They were problems waiting for elegant solutions. The culture of Syracuse was also deeply religious, and this shaped how Archimedes' work was seen. The Greeks often viewed extraordinary skill as a gift from the gods, a spark of divine fire. To the citizens of Syracuse, Archimedes' inventions would have seemed miraculous, bordering on supernatural. A man who could move a ship with a single hand, who could harness the sun or tame water, was not only a mathematician, but a vessel of divine favor. Yet Archimedes himself was no mystic. His devotion was to the clarity of mathematics, to the laws of balance, volume, and motion. Where others saw miracles, he saw geometry. In this lay the quiet revolution of his mind. He proved that what seemed divine could be explained, and what seemed impossible could be built. Thus the stage was set. Syracuse was wealthy, anxious, and dependent on clever minds. Archimedes, a young scholar returned from Alexandria, stood ready to bridge the world of theory and the world of necessity. The city would soon test his talents in ways that even he could not have foreseen. Archimedes quickly earned a reputation in Syracuse as a man unlike any other. While many citizens admired the beauty of temples, the riches of the market, or the pomp of festivals, Archimedes often seemed lost in thought, gazing at the simplest of things with the intensity of a priest before an altar. To him, a pebble on the shore or a bucket of water was not trivial. It was a doorway into hidden truths. Accounts from antiquity describe Archimedes as a man who could lose himself so completely in his work that he forgot food, sleep, or the passage of time. He would draw geometric figures in the dust with a stick, or scratch them onto walls with charcoal, muttering calculations under his breath. Servants were said to drag him to meals, only for him to continue tracing shapes with his finger on the tabletop. For Archimedes, the world was one vast diagram waiting to be understood. Yet he was not aloof or detached from reality. He delighted in testing his ideas against the practical challenges of daily life. Watching dock workers load heavy barrels into ships, he studied the ropes and pulleys, wondering how their efforts might be eased. Observing water flowing through channels in the fields, he pondered how it might be raised or redirected. His mind refused to rest until he had found elegant solutions. This habit of constant questioning made him both admired and, at times, misunderstood. To merchants and farmers, his fascination with lines and ratios might have seemed eccentric. But to King Hiero and his court, Archimedes' curiosity was a gift. They recognized that in a world balanced on the edge of war, a man who could bend nature's laws into service was a treasure beyond gold. The young Archimedes also displayed a playful streak, a quality often overlooked in tales of his genius. Ancient anecdotes suggest he enjoyed clever puzzles, riddles, and even mechanical toys of his own making. He found joy in discovery for its own sake, not only in grand projects, but in small wonders. To him, a toy that demonstrated balance was as fascinating as a machine that moved ships. This childlike delight never left him, even in old age. Gradually, Syracuse began to understand that it housed a mind unlike any other. Whispers of his brilliance spread through the city. The young man who could move a ship with ease, who measured the heavens with chalk in the dirt, who spoke of numbers as if they were living things. He was eccentric, yes, but also indispensable. In these early years, Archimedes' habits were already shaping the legacy that would outlast empires. He taught by example that genius is not only about flashes of inspiration, but about persistence, curiosity, and the courage to see significance in what others ignore. He was laying the foundation of a life where the boundaries between play and work, theory and practice would dissolve into a single quest to understand and to create.
By the time Archimedes had completed his studies in Alexandria and returned to Syracuse, his reputation as a gifted mathematician had already begun to spread. The scholars of Egypt had seen his brilliance, and word traveled with sailors and merchants across the Mediterranean. When Archimedes walked once more through the streets of his home city, he was not merely Phidias's son. He was a rising star, a man whispered about in the halls of learning.
For Syracuse, his timing was perfect. King Hiero II, who had ruled for decades with a mix of caution and cunning, was always on the lookout for ways to strengthen his city. Hiero was not only a soldier and politician, but also a man who appreciated cleverness and innovation. He had stabilized Syracuse by forging alliances and carefully managing its wealth. But he knew that survival in a world of giants required more than diplomacy. It required ingenuity. Archimedes became a natural companion to the king. Stories tell of their close relationship, Hiero entrusting the young mathematician with problems that others could not solve. Whether it was improving trade, strengthening fortifications, or verifying the honesty of craftsmen, Archimedes proved indispensable. The crown problem, the question of whether Hiero's goldsmith had cheated him, would later become one of the most famous demonstrations of Archimedes' genius. But long before that, the king saw in him a rare gift, the power to transform mathematics into service for the city. With the support of the royal court, Archimedes was free to experiment. He had resources, materials, and above all, time, the precious commodity that genius requires. He turned workshops into laboratories, filling them with wood, rope, stone, and bronze. He tested pulleys, balanced beams, and crafted models. Where others saw clutter, he saw possibilities. Yet Archimedes did not live solely in the service of Hiero. He was equally devoted to his own pursuit of pure knowledge. Between building practical machines, he returned to the abstract realms of geometry, calculating areas, volumes, and ratios with meticulous care. For him, there was no conflict between the two worlds, the crown and the theorem, the catapult and the proof, all flowed from the same source, a belief that nature was governed by order and that mathematics was the key to unlocking it. The people of Syracuse began to marvel at the man who seemed capable of miracles. Farmers whispered of a device that could raise water more easily than a dozen men with buckets. Sailors spoke of pulleys that allowed a single hand to haul an entire ship onto dry land. Children might have crowded around to see mechanical toys of spinning spheres and moving figures. Archimedes was both magician and mathematician, both craftsman and philosopher. In this atmosphere, the stage was set for his first great creations. The city of Syracuse, perched between Rome and Carthage, could not know that its future survival would one day rest upon the mind of this quiet genius. Archimedes, still young but already celebrated, was ready to begin the work that would make his name immortal. Among Archimedes' earliest and most practical inventions was a device so elegant, so enduring, that it still turns today in fields and canals across the world.
known to history as the Archimedean screw. It was a machine born from simple observation and brilliant refinement, and it revealed the genius of a man who could look at everyday problems and discover timeless solutions. The problem was an ancient one: how to raise water from a low place to a higher one. Farmers needed it for irrigation. Miners required it to drain pits. Sailors struggled to clear water from the hulls of ships. Buckets and manual lifting had always been the answer, but they demanded endless labor. Archimedes saw in this task an opportunity for geometry to step in. The device he built was deceptively simple. Imagine a hollow cylinder, inside which runs a helical blade or spiral. One end rests in water. By turning the cylinder, the spiral scoops the water upward along its winding path, carrying it higher with each rotation until it pours out from the top. It could be powered by hand, by a crank, or even by animals walking steadily beside it. With this invention, water became obedient. A single man could achieve the work of many. A farmer could irrigate his fields without exhausting himself with endless buckets. Sailors could bail water from their ships with ease. The principle was universal, and the machine adaptable. What is remarkable is not only the utility of the screw, but the mind behind it. Archimedes saw that by twisting space into a spiral, one could guide a substance upward against its natural flow. The spiral was geometry in motion, a physical manifestation of mathematical thought. Ancient writers recorded their amazement. To them, the screw was a marvel, a machine that seemed to defy nature. To Archimedes, it was proof of what mathematics could do. He had not conjured magic. He had uncovered a principle that anyone could see and use. It was a democratization of genius, a gift to farmers, sailors, and engineers alike. The screw spread far beyond Syracuse. It was carried to Egypt, where it helped raise Nile waters into irrigation canals. It appeared across the Hellenistic world, copied and adapted. Even centuries later, during the Roman Empire and beyond, versions of the screw continued to serve. Remarkably, its descendants still function today. In parts of Africa, India, and Europe, Archimedean screws lift water just as they did more than 2,000 years ago. This was only the beginning. The screw established Archimedes' reputation not merely as a thinker, but as an engineer of the highest order. He had proven that the world's oldest struggles could be answered by the youngest of ideas, and that mathematics could be turned into wood and bronze with life-changing consequences. For Archimedes, however, the screw was just one step along a much larger path. His mind was already turning to new challenges: weight, force, balance, and the hidden power of the lever. If the Archimedean screw revealed Archimedes' gift for practical machines, it was his work with levers and pulleys that made his reputation almost mythical. To this day, school children repeat his famous boast, "Give me a lever long enough, and I will move the earth. The principle was deceptively simple. A lever is nothing more than a rigid bar that pivots on a point, the fulcrum. Place the fulcrum in the right spot, and a small effort on one end produces a much larger force on the other. It was a truth known in some form to builders and laborers for centuries, but Archimedes gave it mathematical clarity. He showed that the power of the lever could be predicted, controlled, and multiplied. King Hiero himself witnessed the dramatic proof. Archimedes promised to move something no man could move alone, a fully loaded ship resting heavy in the harbor. The vessel was packed with sailors and cargo, its hull pressing deep into the water. To drag it onto land normally required teams of workers straining at ropes. Archimedes, however, had designed a system of pulleys and levers that magnified his strength many times over. The demonstration was held before the court. Archimedes stood calmly at the mechanism, took hold of a rope, and with what seemed like casual effort began to pull. Slowly, impossibly, the great ship stirred. It slid forward, inch by inch, until it rested on the sand as though guided by invisible giants. The onlookers gasped. To them, it was a miracle. To Archimedes, it was geometry. The ratios of distances, the balance of force and resistance, all reduced to a system he could explain with chalk on a board. What looked like magic was, in truth, mathematics written into wood and rope. The pulleys, too, became a signature of his work. By arranging ropes over wheels in clever sequences, Archimedes allowed one man to lift weights that would normally take 10. A crate of stone, a massive beam, all could be raised into place with ease. Builders adopted these devices, and they soon spread throughout the Greek world. The king, deeply impressed, declared that Syracuse had in Archimedes a treasure greater than gold. It was said that Hiero joked he feared nothing as long as Archimedes was alive, for who could conquer a city defended by such a mind? Archimedes' lever demonstration entered legend, not just because of its spectacle, but because of what it symbolized. He had shown that thought could magnify human power. The mind, when applied with precision, could move more than the strongest army of men. For Archimedes, this was not pride, but proof. He had revealed that mathematics was not an abstraction for philosophers alone. It was a force as real as the tides, as practical as bread and water. The lever became his emblem, a simple device embodying a profound truth, that knowledge, properly applied, could move the world. The partnership between Archimedes and Hiero II became one of the most important relationships of his life. Hiero was not a philosopher, nor a man of numbers, but he understood the value of intellect. Where other rulers sought strength in armies, Hiero saw in Archimedes a weapon just as powerful, a mind capable of defending the city with ideas as formidable as swords. Their friendship is remembered in anecdotes that capture both the king's trust and Archimedes' brilliance. Hiero often turned to the mathematician when confronted with problems too delicate or too complex for ordinary advisors. One of the most famous was the matter of the golden crown. Hiero had commissioned a magnificent crown as an offering to the gods, paying the goldsmith with a weight of pure gold. When the finished piece was delivered, it glittered with beauty, but whispers reached Hiero that the craftsman had cheated him, mixing cheaper silver into the crown while keeping some of the gold for himself. To cut or melt the crown would ruin it. Hiero, cautious but suspicious, sought Archimedes' counsel. Could he prove the truth without destroying the work? The problem was both practical and elegant, the kind that delighted Archimedes. For days he pondered, restless and distracted. And then, as legend tells us, the answer came not in the workshop, but in the bathhouse. As he lowered himself into the water, he noticed the liquid rise, spilling over the rim. The volume of water displaced, he realized, equaled the volume of his body. With a sudden flash of insight, he understood how to solve the riddle of the crown. Leaping from the bath, he ran naked through the streets, shouting, "Eureka! Eureka! I have found it!" The citizens laughed at the sight of their eccentric genius rushing unclothed, but the discovery was no laughing matter. Archimedes tested the crown by immersing it in water, comparing the displacement to that of pure gold of equal weight. The crown displaced more water, proving it was less dense, and therefore adulterated with silver. The fraud was exposed, and the king's suspicion confirmed. The principle uncovered that day, now called Archimedes' principle of buoyancy, became one of the cornerstones of physics. It explained why ships float and why objects sink, revealing that a body immersed in a fluid is pushed upward by a force equal to the weight of the fluid displaced. What began as a royal suspicion had blossomed into a law of nature. For Hiero, the result was justice. For Archimedes, it was triumph, the pure joy of discovery, the thrill of transforming an everyday observation into eternal truth. The episode cemented Archimedes' place at the king's side. Hiero trusted him not only as an inventor, but as a man who could turn riddles into revelations. From then on, Archimedes was more than a citizen of Syracuse. He was its problem solver, its engineer, and, when the city's survival hung in the balance, its greatest defender. Though Archimedes dazzled kings with levers and astonished scholars with geometry, much of his true genius lay in the way he improved the everyday life of his fellow citizens. For Archimedes, there was no barrier between lofty mathematics and practical necessity. If a principle could be proven with chalk, it could also be built with wood and rope. And if it could be built, it could serve. One of his most valuable contributions was the refinement of block and tackle pulley systems. Sailors of Syracuse already knew the usefulness of pulleys, but Archimedes perfected the arrangements, designing compound systems where ropes looped through multiple wheels. With these, a single man could raise a weight that normally required a team. Heavy beams for construction, barrels of goods for trade, even the masts of ships, all could be lifted with far less effort. To the dock workers, Archimedes must have seemed almost magical. Imagine the scene. A laborer accustomed to straining alongside his fellows suddenly discovers that with one rope and a steady pull, he can move a load many times his weight. The pulley was not simply a machine, it was a transformation of human ability. Beyond the docks, Archimedes' ingenuity reached the fields. His water lifting devices, variations of the screw and pumps, allowed farmers to irrigate more efficiently. Where once a family might have spent hours hauling buckets, a simple turning of a crank could direct water into dry furrows. This was more than convenience. In a land where crops meant survival, Archimedes' machines could spell the difference between famine and abundance. He also experimented with clever devices for measurement, water clocks for marking time, balances for weighing goods, and instruments for astronomical observation. Each blended theory with application, giving merchants, farmers, and scholars alike tools that improved their work. These practical machines endeared Archimedes to the ordinary citizens of Syracuse. He was not some distant thinker locked away in ivory towers. He walked the same markets, saw the same problems, and offered solutions that touched daily life. To the people, he became both wonder worker and benefactor, a man who could ease burdens and reveal mysteries at the same time. What's striking is that Archimedes did not see these as separate achievements from his abstract mathematics. To him, the pulley and the proof were of equal value, each a manifestation of the same hidden order. He could move fluid with a screw because he understood the geometry of spirals. He could lift ships with pulleys because he knew the ratios of force and distance. He did not divide his mind between the practical and the theoretical. He saw them as one. Thus, in the streets of Syracuse, Archimedes' reputation spread not only as a man of puzzles and theorems, but as someone whose genius touched the hands of farmers and sailors. He was building, perhaps unknowingly, the dual legacy that would outlast empires, the image of Archimedes as both philosopher and engineer, equally at home with chalk dust and ship timbers. For Archimedes, machines were not accidents of clever tinkering, but the physical embodiment of mathematics. Every rope he threaded, every beam he balanced, was rooted in ratios, geometry, and proofs that could be traced back to the chalk lines he drew in dust. To him, the world was governed by principles as strict and beautiful as those written in Euclid's scrolls, and his machines were simply ways of making those principles visible. Consider the lever. To ordinary eyes, it was a tool of convenience, a stick to move a stone. To Archimedes, it was a mathematical truth. He understood that the distances from the fulcrum mattered as much as the forces applied, and he could calculate precisely how much effort was needed to balance or move an object. Where others guessed, he proved. Where others strained, he optimized. The same was true for pulleys. Sailors had used them for generations, but Archimedes revealed why they worked, breaking down the tension in each rope and showing how mechanical advantage multiplied. His diagrams explained what muscle memory already knew, and in explaining, he expanded the possibilities. By arranging pulleys in compound systems, he made them vastly more powerful than anything used before. He also applied mathematics to the Archimedean screw, calculating the angle of the spiral, the rate of rotation, and the volume of water lifted per turn. What seemed like a rustic farming tool was, in truth, a geometric masterpiece. Even today, engineers who study fluid dynamics recognize the mathematical elegance hidden in its simple design. Archimedes' approach reflected the broader Greek tradition of seeking harmony in nature. But he went further, showing that harmony could be harnessed for human use. To him, geometry was not only a mirror of the cosmos, but also a toolkit. He measured the earth and the heavens, then turned those same measurements to ships and fields. The division between theory and practice, so often seen as unbridgeable, simply did not exist in his mind. This mindset made Archimedes unique even among his contemporaries. Many Greek philosophers scorned practical labor, considering it beneath the dignity of pure thought. Archimedes, though capable of soaring into the abstract, never shied away from rolling up his sleeves and building. In doing so, he broke a cultural barrier. He proved that mathematics was not a sterile art, but a living force, capable of reshaping the world. It is this unity of mind and hand, of chalk and timber, that explains why Archimedes' name endures. His machines astonished because they worked, and they worked because they were born of proof, not guesswork. Every demonstration, every invention was a lesson in geometry disguised as a miracle. The people of Syracuse may not have understood the formulas behind the pulleys or the proofs behind the screw, but they felt their impact in lighter burdens, stronger defenses, and ships that moved as if by magic. Archimedes was teaching them, in his quiet way, that the laws of mathematics were not confined to scrolls. They were written into the world itself. Though Archimedes' inventions for farmers and sailors earned admiration, it was his work for Syracuse's defenses that would make him legendary. The city, perched on Sicily's coast, was constantly aware of danger. To the west lay Carthage, to the north Rome. Both powers saw Sicily as the key to controlling the Mediterranean. Syracuse's wealth and harbors made it a prize too tempting to ignore. King Hiero II understood that survival depended not only on alliances, but on preparedness. He turned to Archimedes, the man whose pulleys had moved ships and whose screws had tamed water. If geometry could lift stone and balance beams, might it not also defend a city from invading armies. Archimedes answered with machines that would terrify enemies for generations: improved catapults. Catapults were not new. The Greeks had long used torsion-powered devices, machines where twisted bundles of rope or sinew stored energy, releasing it in sudden, violent bursts to hurl projectiles. What Archimedes did was refine them with mathematical precision. He calculated trajectories, adjusted arm lengths, and designed models for different ranges. A small catapult might shoot darts or stones at advancing troops, while larger ones could hurl massive boulders at ships or siege engines.
The effect was devastating. Roman accounts later described missiles crashing down from Syracuse's walls with such force that even the bravest soldiers hesitated. Ships that ventured too close were shattered by stones heavier than any man could lift, launched with uncanny accuracy. Archimedes' catapults also displayed adaptability. According to legend, he designed machines of varying sizes that could be wheeled to different points on the walls, making Syracuse's defenses unpredictable. Enemies never knew what might be unleashed upon them: a rain of arrows, a barrage of stones, or darts that pierced shields as though they were paper. To the people of Syracuse, these weapons were more than tools of war. They were symbols of their city's ingenuity, proof that their survival depended not on sheer strength, but on the genius of one man. For the Romans and Carthaginians, they were a nightmare, evidence that even mighty empires could be humbled by mathematics in action. Archimedes himself, though, never boasted of his machines. To him, they were an application of geometry, a natural extension of his studies. War may have demanded them, but they were not what he cherished most. In his heart, he preferred proofs to catapults, the tranquility of theorems to the chaos of battle. Yet necessity bound him to war, and his city's survival depended on his reluctant genius. This was only the beginning. Catapults were effective, but Archimedes' mind was restless. He would go on to devise even more astonishing machines, cranes that plucked ships from the sea, and perhaps even mirrors that harnessed the power of the sun. Syracuse was becoming not just a city with strong walls, but a fortress of invention. Among all the stories told of Archimedes' genius, none has captured the imagination quite like the tale of the burning mirrors. It is a legend that has echoed through the centuries, that Archimedes, faced with enemy ships besieging Syracuse, harnessed the sun itself as a weapon, setting wooden vessels ablaze with concentrated light. According to ancient sources, Archimedes instructed soldiers to hold up large polished bronze shields. Positioned at just the right angles, they reflected the sunlight onto the Roman ships clustered in the harbor. Slowly, the beams of light converged on sails and timbers, heating them until they smoldered, then caught fire. Panic spread among the Romans as their ships burned not by fire arrows or catapults, but by the very rays of the sun. To later generations, the image was irresistible. Archimedes, the philosopher-engineer,
standing on the walls of Syracuse, turning mathematics into fire, wielding the cosmos as his ally. It was the ultimate proof of his brilliance that he could bend nature itself into a weapon. But was it true? Historians have long debated the story. Some believe it was exaggerated by later writers, eager to glorify Archimedes. Others argue it was possible under certain conditions, if the day was clear, the mirrors large, and the ships held still. Modern experiments from the Middle Ages to the present have tested the theory with mixed results. Some managed to ignite wood, but only under perfect conditions. Others dismissed it as impractical in real battle. Whether fact or legend, the burning mirrors reveal something essential about Archimedes. Even if he never built such a weapon, the story persisted because it captured his spirit. The idea that he could take an everyday object, a mirror, and transform it into something astonishing through the precision of mathematics. The tale was less about fire than about imagination, the ability to see possibilities hidden in plain sight. For the people of Syracuse, the legend would have been believable. After all, they had seen ships moved by pulleys, water raised by screws, stones hurled with deadly accuracy. Why not the sun harnessed as a torch? To them, Archimedes was already a miracle worker. A story of mirrors and flames fit naturally into his growing myth. Even if the burning mirrors never scorched a Roman sail, the idea endured as one of Archimedes' most dramatic legacies. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, artists painted him wielding fiery beams. Inventors tried to recreate the device. The myth of the burning mirrors became a symbol of human ingenuity, of the dream that knowledge could give us power over nature itself. And perhaps that is the greater truth. Whether or not Archimedes set ships aflame, he ignited imaginations. His machines, his discoveries, and his restless mind lit fires in the world of thought that still burn today. While his war machines defended Syracuse, and his practical devices served farmers and sailors, Archimedes' heart always belonged to pure mathematics. He considered his weapons crude applications of his intellect, distractions forced upon him by necessity. What he valued most were his proofs, demonstrations of eternal truths that could outlast any battle. Among his greatest joys was his work on the geometry of spheres and cylinders. Archimedes discovered a profound relationship between these shapes. He proved that the volume of a sphere is exactly 2/3 the volume of the cylinder that encloses it, provided the cylinder has the same height and diameter as the sphere. Likewise, the surface area of the sphere, including its great circle, is also 2/3 that of the cylinder's surface. To us, this might seem like an elegant but obscure observation. To Archimedes, it was a revelation. It revealed that shapes as different as a ball and a cylinder were bound by hidden harmonies. He did not merely state these relationships. He proved them rigorously, step by logical step, until no doubt remained. This discovery gave him such pride that he later requested it be carved onto his tombstone, a simple sphere inscribed within a cylinder, a quiet symbol of the theorem he loved most. Even in death, he wished to be remembered not as a maker of engines, but as a seeker of truth in geometry. Archimedes' fascination with shapes extended far beyond spheres and cylinders. He explored the properties of spirals, parabolas, and other curves, often devising ingenious methods to calculate areas and volumes. At a time when most mathematicians relied on straightforward measurements, Archimedes pushed into the realm of what would one day become calculus. By slicing shapes into infinite sections and summing their parts, he approached concepts of limits and infinitesimals centuries before Newton and Leibniz. His methods were so advanced that later generations struggled to understand them. Mathematicians of the Renaissance, rediscovering his work, marveled at how he had reached results they thought belonged only to modern science. He had been, in many ways, a man out of time, glimpsing truths that would not be fully embraced until nearly 2 millennia later. What made Archimedes extraordinary was not only his discoveries, but the joy he took in them. Ancient anecdotes describe him leaping up from proofs as eagerly as from inventions, exclaiming when a demonstration finally clicked into place. To him, a perfect theorem was as thrilling as any victory in war, perhaps even more so. Battles ended, machines broke, but a proof was eternal. Thus, while Syracuse praised him for defending its walls and easing its burdens, Archimedes himself cherished the chalk lines, the quiet solitude of geometry, and the elegance of shapes. In the harmony of spheres and cylinders, he glimpsed the order of the cosmos, and perhaps even the hand of the divine. If there was one number that captured Archimedes' fascination more than any other, it was pi, the mysterious ratio between a circle's circumference and its diameter. Long before the invention of modern notation, Archimedes sought to pin down this elusive constant, to measure precisely what seemed immeasurable. His method was ingenious. Instead of attempting to measure a circle directly, Archimedes inscribed and circumscribed polygons around it, first hexagons, then polygons with more and more sides. By comparing the perimeters of these polygons to the circumference of the circle, he created bounds within which chi must lie. With patient calculation, he eventually narrowed it to between 3 and 10/71, about 3.1408, and 3 and 11/7, about 3.1429. For over 1,000 years, this remained the most accurate estimate of pi in existence. The brilliance of this method lay not only in its accuracy, but in its spirit. Archimedes had taken something infinite, the perfect smoothness of a circle, and approached it through the finite by chopping it into ever smaller pieces. It was a leap of thought that foreshadowed the entire discipline of calculus. His explorations did not end with circles. Archimedes studied the areas of parabolas, showing that the area of a segment of a parabola is always 4/3 that of a certain inscribed triangle. He examined spirals, volumes of spheres and surfaces of cylinders, developing formulas where none had existed. To him, the challenge was not only to measure,
but to reveal hidden patterns. The ratios that tied together shapes as if they were part of a grand design. Perhaps most extraordinary was his use of what modern mathematicians call the method of exhaustion. By dividing a shape into an infinite number of ever smaller slices, Archimedes reasoned his way to results that look strikingly like integral calculus. Imagine him scratching figures in the sand of a Syracuse courtyard, summing infinite slices with a mind centuries ahead of its time. Though he lacked the algebraic tools of later ages, his geometric insights were so precise that when calculus was formally invented in the 17th century, many results echoed what Archimedes had already achieved. Newton himself once remarked that if Archimedes' writings had been preserved more fully, the ancients would have anticipated us. Archimedes' pursuit of pi and his explorations of area and volume demonstrate the dual nature of his genius. He lived in a world of ropes, ships, and catapults, but his mind roamed among infinities and eternal truths. For him, the practical and the abstract were not rivals, but partners, each feeding the other. His machines were born of mathematics, and his mathematics were sharpened by the problems of the real world. In the endless digits of pi, Archimedes glimpsed the unending nature of truth. Though he could never write it in full, he understood that knowledge could be approached, bounded, and refined, and in that pursuit lay the joy of discovery. For all his reputation as a solemn thinker, Archimedes also possessed a playful side. His genius was not confined to war machines and solemn theorems. He delighted in puzzles, clever tricks, and mental challenges that revealed the lighter side of mathematics. The Greeks often valued intellectual games, and Archimedes was no exception. One of his surviving works, the Stomachion, is a kind of ancient dissection puzzle. It consisted of a square divided into 14 pieces of varying shapes, which could be rearranged into countless figures. At first glance, it seemed like a child's toy, a pastime to amuse dinner guests. Yet Archimedes studied it deeply, calculating the number of possible combinations, a task that touches on what we now call combinatorics. Centuries later, mathematicians would rediscover his work and realize he had anticipated ideas about counting and arrangement far ahead of his time. Another work, The Sand Reckoner, shows Archimedes' playful imagination at its most ambitious. He challenged himself to calculate how many grains of sand could fit in the universe. To most, the question was absurd, but Archimedes turned it into a profound exploration of number systems. To express such vast quantities, he devised a method of notation capable of describing numbers far greater than those ordinarily used by the Greeks. In doing so, he anticipated the concept of exponential notation, the very foundation of modern mathematics. What began as a whimsical thought experiment, how many grains of sand fill the cosmos, became a treatise on infinity itself. Archimedes also enjoyed paradoxes. In his study of infinite processes, he crafted arguments that seemed to stretch the mind beyond reason. By dividing shapes into endlessly smaller parts, he teased out results that defied ordinary intuition, yet revealed deeper truths. To his contemporaries, these demonstrations were dazzling, a mixture of logic and wonder that blurred the line between play and philosophy. Even his mechanical devices sometimes carried a note of playfulness. Ancient writers mention that he constructed small automata, moving models of celestial spheres or mechanical toys that demonstrated the motions of the heavens. These devices were not only scientific instruments, but also entertainments, marvels that combined artistry and engineering. To watch tiny planets turn in perfect harmony was both an education and a delight. This lighter side of Archimedes reminds us that genius is not only about grim calculation, it is also about curiosity, imagination, and joy. He approached problems not as burdens, but as games, puzzles waiting to be solved. Whether lifting a ship or counting grains of sand, he brought the same enthusiasm, the same sparkle of discovery. To the people of Syracuse, these quirks must have seemed part of his charm. They saw in him not only a great mathematician, but also a man who could laugh, who could marvel, who could turn even the smallest curiosity into a window on the infinite. It was this blend of rigor and play that made him unforgettable, a man whose mind danced as easily as it calculated. The legend of Archimedes' cry of Eureka has echoed through more than 2 millennia, becoming perhaps the most famous anecdote in the history of science. Yet behind the story lies a very real problem of trust, mathematics, and ingenuity, one that placed Archimedes at the center of King Hiero II's concerns.